But I mean, no, Kasa Sisiano, one person, meets Makasa or yet the nemesis, Michessa, Ubi on Penasem, Mahama, Nippon Pen Mahama, Sem, the media space, Paul Adom Otchere. In fact, recently he was picked up by a Iyoko, being investigated for some shady deals, of course, so at the airport. Now, Paul Adom Otchere is out here again, but then Paul Adom Otchere is saying something different now. Paul Adom Otchere, he happened to host the Good Morning Ghana. And the issue at hand was Mahama's speech and even how he viewed it. And surprisingly enough, Paul Adom Otchere actually says, he kind of watched the speech, but then the truth of the matter is that this particular speech at Mahama he has some reservations about it. What are some of the reservations are all about it? Mijafo said he really applauds it because Mahama spoke from the heart. And when Mahama is speaking from the heart, it is clear and evident saying and basically in it was very clear and also evident that he knew exactly what he was saying. To stand on the podium in America and call out Donald Trump, boldly call out Donald Trump saying immigration policies is affecting freedom. You have to have some balls. And even to finish that thing, and at the end of the day, sound so if anything, banner, it clearly tells you, say, no, there is something I also. And now Mahama may have a soft power somewhere, and now his boldness is actually paying off. You could see Paul Adom Otchere,
Oh, you watched it yesterday? Or you listened to radio? Or you watched this excerpt?
Yeah, I watched on television. I saw it. I think it was has been described.
Impressed?
It was good. Yes, it was good.
Okay.
Really, the bigger impression is that most of the African leaders seem to be saying the same thing. That was quite impressive. Actually, the first time I've closely monitored the General Assembly and I've seen the convergence of either a demand or a policy position that is resonating among Ghana, Kenya, and Mozambique. Everyone who spoke said the same thing. This is also the first General Assembly that I've seen Africa really put forward a threat. And that was also quite impressive. And perhaps it's coming at the right time. Nelson Mandela said something that President Mahama quoted. But on this occasion, Africa is threatening that it will withdraw from the United Nations if it doesn't accede to its demands of a permanent Security Council role with a veto power. The other thing that President Mahama said that was interesting is that he's asking the United Nations to allow the General Assembly to review the application of veto. That's very interesting, very, very crucial.
Why?
Because the concept of the veto power has exactly been the opposite.
Right.
That these countries among us birth our organization, they are the most important countries, and so they are going to be our brain to think going forward.
Right.
The lack of democratization at the United Nations has always been a big part of the conversation, even during the 60s, when the Kwame Nkrumahs were around. The supposed lack of democratization, Rawlings criticized it when he became a military ruler, and almost every African, Asian leader has criticized it. But it hinges on money. Really, the power that play at the United Nations hinges really on resources. Whether these resources, which are actual, are going to give away to the threat being carried by potential resources. And that's really where the conversation is. Africa is telling the United Nations that I may not have resources today, but potentially I'm the richest amongst you. My population is young. I have all the natural resources in my place. If I figure out how to go about it, I am great. So Africa is threatening with the potential. Yeah. Whether that's potential, the threat with potential resources will overcome the existence of the application of actual resources, which is really what determines what happens at the United Nations. The countries, the Security Council countries, especially America, are the biggest people in there because they pay the most. They pay for everything. They host it in New York, and other European countries host it in Geneva, and they pay. Right. Now, they have a say because they pay. He who pays the piper calls the tune. Africa is now saying that enough, we are tired of it. We may not have the money, but potentially you will need us. And it's going to be very interesting how that conversation goes. And this conversation has been going on in other forums like the WTO for a very long time. Africa has not been successful in those places, fundamentally because, well, it's a power play that is anchored on economic strength. Right. So we'll see how it comes into the United Nations. But very, very interesting how Africa positioned itself for this 80th. I think is most appropriate, and it's good to know that the Ghanaian president is playing a very big role in this new narrative that Africa is developing in the global politics.
Okay. What are witness of saying?
Well, so first of all, you could see in law and in legal practice, we call it presence. I mean, you could see the presence of John Dramani Mahama looming large at the UN General Assembly, especially the tapestry of the clothing that he wore, and clearly sent a message to his colleagues there that he was coming from Ghana, Africa, and taking the stage his place on the world stage. Now, throughout history, particularly after the Second World War and the establishment of the United Nations as a successor to the League of Nations, which failed because they failed to take certain critical decisions when it mattered most and lost its legitimacy. Many nations acted with impunity. The lopsided nature of the League of Nations itself was responsible for the collapse of the first attempt at the universalization of culture and the way of behavior. Now, so when the United Nations was formed, there were certain core principles that all independent countries must apply to be members of the United Nations. That there will be a General Assembly of all the members. Now, the imperialist powers, those who were the victors in the Second World War, then couched a niche for themselves and called them the Security Council, and they were the 5 permanent members of the Security Council. Now, that arrangement, it gave them certain powers, including the power of veto that Paul just referred to. And that veto seems to be inconsistent with the very founding principles of the United Nations. That look, we must meet and arrive at a consensus on how we should tackle world peace. Now, so most of the countries on most of the nations on the 5 permanent Security Council have, at one point or the other, used the veto power, aligned with their ideological persuasions and persons who they feel they must protect. Just 2 days or 3 days ago, United States exercised that veto power in preventing the United Nations from resolving to pursue a ceasefire in the United Nations, largely because of the involvement of Israel. We think that Africa must have a voice as well. I mean, you can't, 54 countries in Africa, are excluded from all decisions and discussions on the Security Council. And that is where the real power is, not in the General Assembly where it's almost like a talk shop. And so we think that you can't exclude 54 countries from having a voice on the Security Council and still think that you are a democratic institution. And so that's why African countries are pushing for a voice on the Security Council. And the push has been loudest in the past and dwindled off. Nigeria and South Africa were at the forefront for pushing for a representation on the Security Council. I think that there's a renewed attempt by African countries, and like Paul alluded, almost all the African countries spoke about a certain level of reform on the Security Council to ensure that Africans have a voice. But there's no doubt that the architecture and design of the Security Council is to serve the interests of the imperialist powers. It's one. They still are couched in the mode of colonial powers. Those who are colonies in Africa and elsewhere were those who were on the Security Council. 3, it's a class system. At the United Nations. So you have the first class of people who are the 5 permanent members, and then the General Assembly. Even the General Secretary or Secretary General of the UN kowtows to the Security Council, and so the system is so skewed that most countries do not think that they have fairness in the representation at the Security Council, and that is what African countries are calling for. But John Dramani Mahama's speech was seminal in many respects. So we'll just discuss the call for a reset of the Security Council. And that is at the heart of the problem that Africans see of the Security Council and the United Nations. Two, these powers, and Paul says money, they contribute money and they hold the conferences. But where is the money coming from?
Right.
I mean, look at Britain. It's our colonial masters. They were they were a backyard of Europe. They didn't have any natural resources. Right. The wealth of the UK is largely from all the colonies that UK and Britain colonized, and so and shift all the resources to develop their country and also have the status as a world power within the United Nations. So it is the design of the imperialist system that is perpetuating this level of deprivation and motivating the people of Africa to ask for more. Look at the rail system in this country of ours. Starts from the mineral producing areas and ends at the ports. That should tell you something. That it was exploitative at best. Take the resources, move them elsewhere, and develop your country. And so, I don't know of any gold mine in the UK, but the Buckingham Palace and all the Windsor and others have huge quantities of gold. Right. Even the Bank of England has huge quantities of gold to support their currency. This gold could only have come from the colonies that were colonized, and particularly Ghana. And so, for us as a people, imperialism actually diminished our status as a people. Ali Mozeri says, you meet 3 Ghanaians, and you don't know whether, or 3 Africans, and you don't know whether they are Africans, Europeans, or Asians. That's what colonization did. It robbed us of our own dignity. Now we're trying to pick the pieces and ensure that we are counted as equal members of the society, of the global society. And to be counted as equal members of the global society, we must take our rightful places. Now, we're saying that an African mining vision confirms the position of John Dramani Mahama. Now, our natural resources must be used to develop our own countries. It must be a catalyst for the development of our countries. We must exploit our resources for our own countries, because God in His wisdom gave us those resources to develop our countries, not for the resources to be taken from Africa to develop other countries. And so, yes, since we have the resources, no one should come, and that's what John Dramani Mahama was alluding to. The mining agreements that we have entered into previously have to be relooked and ensure that we take the benefit out of our natural resources.
Okay.
So that was in Sema His Excellency John Dramani Mahama Edituja. Now, let's look at this from this